Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for Pancare's Living Well series webinar. My name is Liz and I'm part of the team here at Pancare Foundation. Our topic today is understanding the financial supports available for people impacted by upper GI cancers. And today we're pleased to have two experts with us today, Mark and Rosie, to bring this presentation. I'd like to start by acknowledging the country we meet on today. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Pancare Foundation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today. For those of you that are new to Pancare, we extend our warmest welcome to our community, which supports Australians affected by upper gastrointestinal cancers, which include pancreatic, esophageal, stomach, liver, and bile duct cancers. This includes anyone who is also directly affected, including their caregivers and families as well. We also support education awareness for health professionals today. So if you're a health professional, we welcome you joining our webinar today as well. For those of you who haven't joined us on one of Pancare's Living Well series webinars before, we've now hosted a series of webinars where we delve into topics that are relevant to your experiences in living with an upper GI cancer. And thanks to the generous support from the Dry July Foundation, the goal of these series is to ensure that you feel informed, equipped and supported as you navigate through the various health, emotional and lifestyle challenges that living with cancer can bring. So far, we've already discussed a lot of different topics, and we've got a couple of little technical tips for you today as well, just to make sure that you feel a little bit more supported. Our goal for today's presentation is to make it as interactive as possible. So we've also got the presenter as well as you guys in the audience. Even though the speakers cannot see you today, there are several features on this platform that can help you capture your questions and comments throughout the presentation. First of all, we've got a poll during today's presentation. Our presenters will ask you a series of questions which will be up on screen, and then you'll be prompted to answer. These answers are shared across the audience and can be collated and posted, and then we'll also discuss them. There's also a support tab that will allow you to ask any technical support questions that you have today from our team behind the scenes. And we've also got a survey at the end of today's presentation that we'd love you to answer, just so we can understand your experiences a bit better, which will help us inform any presentations for the future. Today's session is to help you understand and navigate all the various financial supports that are available in your state or territory that you may be able to access. We'll explore some of the financial complexities and challenges that living with an upper gastrointestinal cancer can bring, and provide some practical information to be able to support you living with this. Today's session is just of general nature and it doesn't take into account any of your personal situation. So you need to consider whether today the information is appropriate to your needs, and where appropriate, we do encourage you to seek professional advice from a financial advisor. I'd love you now to introduce you to two of our today's presenters, Mr. Mark O'Leary and Rosie Bouton. So Mark is a financial advisor since 1984 and is the joint founder of a nationally recognised financial group now known as KRA Wealth Management. It's a Melbourne-based business, and their company provides personal and objective financial advice to a number of individuals and their families, often at critical stages in their life. These circumstances not include planning for retirement or financial independence, but also really look at helping families deal with the sudden consequences of being unable to work due to the unexpected illness or disability. Mark also includes financial advice as part of the Cancer Council Pro Bono program for the last 10 years. And also with us is Rosie. And Rosie is the Director and Principal Planner at We Plan, a financial planning firm that aims to help older Australians live their best life by planning for current and future care needs. Rosie's expertise are in navigating government policy and social services, and she's actually had a role at Centrelink where she assisted carers and their families access financial assistance and other support services. So Mark and Rosie, thank you for being with us today. And Mark, I'd love to hand over to you to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Liz. Look, it's a pleasure to be here, and you've taken most of my introduction in terms of giving my background, so I'm grateful for that. I understand that we're talking to two key stakeholders today, one being the patients, obviously, that are going through such a traumatic set of circumstances, and the the other being their carers. And having been involved with the Cancer Council for some time, I understand to a significant degree what you're going through. My role there has been to assist patients and their families organise their finances so that they can focus on their primary objective, which is really just dealing with treatment and looking after their loved ones. I understand that when people have a sudden diagnosis and a serious diagnosis, that it can be very traumatic. It leads to enormous distress, often confusion, and leaves many just not knowing what to do next or who to turn to. With so many distractions, it's not easy to work through the issues. It really is. When you're sort of going through life and all of a sudden something comes along like this type of diagnosis, it just changes your life entirely, and I understand that. This is individuals are equally impacted, and sometimes more severely than families, because they often have no one to talk to, no one to turn to, no one to confide in. I think that one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that knowing that someone cares makes all the difference. Knowing that there's someone to talk to makes all of the difference. And that can be anyone. That can be a family member, it can be a friend, it can be a financial advisor, it can be a lawyer, it can be anybody within the PanCare family. Our role, I think, in terms of providing financial advice, and certainly what Rosie does, is take away the uncertainty where possible, help develop a strategy to not only help you cope, but to move forward and focus on the key things at this point in time, which is health and ongoing care. Experience tells me that you don't want to rush this, but you need to take it one step at a time. Like any element of financial planning, it's all objectives based, and this is more so because it's very, very sensitive. It's an early, an unfortunate time of somebody's life that they've got all of a sudden and very quickly deal with matters that they weren't expecting to deal with. So the starting point really is to sit down, as it always is, and discuss and identify what's important to you, your partner if you have one, your family, and an extended network. This will lead to having your financial and family affairs organised in the way that you want, to take away stress and enable you to focus on treatment and care. And this is the primary objective. I'll probably say this a few times during my time with you today. The real focus on a patient is to just get on with getting the treatment, to make themselves comfortable and to deal with it as best they can without having to worry about other matters. So our role is to sort of take those away if we can. So when experience tells me again, and when I look back at some of the steps that people have taken over the journey to help them on this pathway towards dealing with focusing on just what is the most important thing. So I think in the first place, what everyone has to do is have open and honest conversations with family and friends about what you're going through. And this is all of you. Ask everyone in the family. It's amazing the ideas that come from this in terms of support. And it's important, really important, to have everybody on the same page, heading in the same direction. This is, given the subject, this is undoubtedly a very difficult area at times, and especially when contemplating outcomes. It's natural for anyone undergoing treatment to worry about their family, and especially when there's children involved. With children, even partners, there's a sense of insecurity. It's good to talk about these things and get them on the table so they can be addressed and dealt with. You want the very best for everyone, but how to balance the now with the longer term. Clearly there are short-term obligations to deal with, and as I said, there's the treatment, but there's financial obligations that have got to be dealt with in a way that takes away the stress and the strain, so you can focus on that treatment. But there's also longer implications to deal, longer-term implications to deal with in relation to family, in relation to children, in relation to partners. There's plenty of support available to guide families through this process if needed, and we'll obviously talk about that a little bit later. But like anything, you've got to start with what it is you're trying to achieve. What's important to you as a family member? What's important to you in terms of the way you see your life unfolding? How do you want to deal with that? And just get on with treatment. There are obviously a lot of practical issues that have got to be dealt with, and like everybody, when these things happen, you you all of a sudden you've got to make decisions about critical matters in your life, like budgets and spending, etc. So we'll talk about that in a second in terms of what are the key areas of concern. But I think right now we're going to do a quick poll just to sort of for you to identify some of those areas of concern. And I think this will take around about 30 seconds or so to go through. Some of the questions that are being asked, as you can see, are what are some of the financial concerns that you're facing, such as the cost of treatment, reduced income, transport and accommodation costs, etc. There's a number of issues that you've all got to deal with, and they impact differently for everybody. No one's the same in terms of what's important to them. So if we can work through that poll for us, and we'll come back in a couple of seconds and sort of go through those. So we can see there from the outcome, and it's a bit hard to see the right-hand side of this, but in terms of importance is the cost of treatment, reduced income, transport and accommodation costs. Ongoing medical and specialist fees are obviously of great concern to all of you, to the majority of you. So in terms of then moving on to areas of concern that I've sort of identified over the years, and certainly they fall exactly into what you're talking about in many ways. But I think if I sort of go back and try and get into some sort of an order, the things that people are concerned about that I've noticed over the years, it sort of flows like this. In the first instance, I think a lot of individuals have got to assess what is the likely impact on you and your family whilst undergoing treatment. How do you manage rest? Can you continue to work? Does your partner need to take time off? How does this impact on children with, say, schooling? Do a budget. The majority of people don't do budgets. It's a fairly boring subject at times, but I think it's particularly important at this point in time. And I think it's really important also to identify what are the non-negotiable expenses, such as day-to-day needs, medical costs. We've seen already the things that are concerning to the majority of you being, primarily ongoing medical costs, but there are other matters to deal with, of course. If you have a mortgage, can you renegotiate with your bank or seek a pause on payments? If you have school fees, can you do the same? We've dealt with one leading private school in Melbourne who, for one particular client, agreed to wipe off 50% of their accumulated school fees and to reduce ongoing fees by 50% whilst the parents were going through, and it was both parents, were going through medical treatment. So it's possible to sit down and renegotiate these expenses so that the children, if you've got children at school, continue without change. What are your current or potential sources of income to see you and your family through? Salary is obviously important. If you're going to be reducing work hours or your partner's going to be reducing work hours, what's the impact on the bottom line? Can you access other sources of income, whether it be Centrelink, and Rosie will be talking about that a little bit later on today, or can you access income protection benefits? Can you access capital if needed? You may have money put away in the bank or other assets you can access to help you through. But is it possible in certain circumstances to claim on superannuation, life or disability insurance, trauma insurance? We'll discuss that a little bit later as well. In terms of planning your budget, if you like, I think it's also important, if possible, to include a lifestyle element, because it just can't just all be about the treatment. You've got to try and spend some time with family, and there might be a cost associated with that. And so I think it's worthwhile to include that in any budget if you're able to do that. A difficult conversation that a lot of people have is ensuring that your estate planning is in good order. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but having an appropriate and valid will is not only important now, but also for the longer term. An effective will is about ensuring a simple transfer of assets without unintentionally causing difficulty to family members and beneficiaries. It is even of greater importance to those with blended families. My understanding is around about 50% of families in this country, families where there's been second marriages and their children from different relationships. They're the sort of things that have got to be dealt with because they would obviously concern people going through treatment. Also, you've got to address powers of attorney, jointly owning assets where appropriate, and nominating beneficiary nominations inside your funds, super funds, correctly. But again, we'll touch on that later. I think it's also important to understand that there is plenty of third-party, financial support. It could be the bank, where you go back and renegotiate better terms, or a pause, as I've mentioned before. It could, and it's certainly Centrelink in many cases, and Rosie will go through that shortly. And as I understand it, Pancare can also be of some assistance in this area. We have another poll to move to, which is leading on to, I think, what's the nature of this poll, guys? If you put it up. How much of these challenges impact on you? So are they constant challenges? Are they some things that you have to worry about or you worry about on an occasional basis? You're just unsure about how to deal with these matters? Please go through this poll for me, and we'll have a look at the results in a few minutes. So it seems that some of the challenges we've outlined sort of rarely impact on you, and that's probably a good thing. It may be that you're fairly well organised. The next topic that I've been asked to sort of address is how do I access funds, or how do you access funds to assist in meeting financial obligations, and specifically from superannuation, life insurance, disability and illness benefits, or government payments. Now, Rosie will be discussing government payments a little bit later on, as soon as I finish this part of the presentation, being the Centrelink expert that she is. But it's important to understand that other than accessing funds from bank accounts, personal assets or extended debt, it's possible to access funds in certain circumstances from super funds and certainly from insurance policies. I'd have to say at the outset that it's really important to get financial advice here to not only assess what's best for you or your family, but also to assist in assessing benefits where appropriate, and making sure that you're still keeping one eye on what the longer-term outcome is, or could be, if you make the wrong decision in terms of what assets you access at this point in time. Superannuation is actually quite a flexible investment, if you like, in times of stress. If an individual hasn't qualified to have their funds released based on employment or age, it's certainly possible to access super in some of the following circumstances, and all on compassionate grounds, for medical treatment, including transport, and that access could be for the individual or for their partner from their super. Compassionate grounds, you can access home loan payments or rates, house council rates if there's a possibility of losing your house. Compassionate grounds obviously include other expenses and severe financial hardship. This is an area that advice is really important with, because you've got to work through a number of steps to sort of qualify. But it's certainly really important, I think, to sort of be aware that superannuation can be accessed in a number of different circumstances, and particularly all under the banner of severe financial hardship. And that's where a lot of people who are going through treatment find themselves at some point. I think it's also important to understand that you can access superannuation and insurance, life insurance, under a terminal illness condition. Now, this isn't always easy to talk about, but life insurance policies do enable access with medical evidence to what they call terminal illness benefits, which basically allows the life insurance company to pay out the life insurance benefit before an individual actually passes away. This is not necessarily a comfortable conversation to have, but for people that I've walked through this in the past, it's been a tremendously comforting position to find themselves in, because many find themselves, quite reassured by the fact that they've taken care of their families and dealt with any financial obligations whilst they can. I had one particular lady who I met a couple of years ago. She walked in with her husband, and her primary focus was on making sure that he was set up for his retirement, given that she was always managing the money. She wanted to make sure that a financial strategy was set in place that enabled her to see money transferred from her insurance policies under this provision, terminal illness provision, to his super fund so that he was okay when she passed away. Another individual was really concerned to make sure that her son, her teenage son, who wasn't living with her, but she had a responsibility for, was taken care of when he turned 25 in the event of her passing. So again, it was important for her in that particular case to have funds released so that she could deal with the money in a way that she really wanted to. Other ways of obviously accessing money or funds through insurance obviously relate to total and permanent disability provisions, and that could be accessed depending on the medical outcome. Trauma cover, many of you might have trauma cover, you might have accessed this already, I'm not sure, obviously, but that is an area of funding to meet ongoing costs. And obviously income protection. It's really quite interesting to me that when I meet people to work through their financial planning obligations, that a lot of individuals don't quite understand what they've got in relation to life insurance, income protection, or disability cover through their super funds. Maybe not so much these days under changed legislation, but there was a time when people had super funds in 2 or 3 different places that are completely forgotten about. And so it's an advisor's responsibility to try and access those funds to really find out what is available to help at a time of great financial distress. So I think that covers off the areas of superannuation, life insurance, disability income, income protection. I think it's important to get access. It's certainly important to get access to an advisor that can actually help you track down lost insurances or lost superannuation funds where possible, because that's pretty important, and specifically at this point in time. So I think that leads us at a point where we need to now pass over to Rosie, who's now going to be speaking to you about Centrelink. So Rosie, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be giving an overview of a few payments available for people living with disability and illness and for their families and carers. This list is definitely not an exhaustive list, as there are many Commonwealth and state-funded initiatives available. So we'll start with payments for carers. Carers are an integral part of Australia's health system. Australia has over 2.7 million carers, 12% of the population. Care relationships can be long-term, such as caring for a person with lifelong disability or chronic conditions such as dementia, or short-term, such as caring for a person with a temporary medical condition. Caring extends just beyond just physical care. It can involve physical personal care and assistance, such as dressing, lifting, showering, feeding, or providing transport. However, it can also involve care of a supervisory nature, such as helping the person they are caring for to be organised, reminding them to attend appointments, dealing with emergencies, and ensuring that they are safe from harm. Let's move on to carer payment. So carer payment is an income support payment for people who, because of the demands of their caring role, are unable to support themselves through substantial paid employment. To be eligible to access carer payment, you must be providing constant care for an adult or child, and constant care is defined as daily care, which is the equivalent of a normal working day. You have to meet the pensions, income and asset tests. You have to be caring for a person who receives an income support payment or who meets the care receiver income and asset test. So the care receiver income and asset test, their income must be less than $116,189 per year, and assets must be worth less than $716,750, excluding the family home. Now, you have to be providing care in a private home. There is no requirement for the carer and care receiver to live together. You both must meet residency rules and also the carer needs to meet the 25-hour rule, which is that they can not participate in paid employment voluntary work or study that takes them away from the caring relationship for more than 25 hours per week, including their travel time to and from that activity. The current maximum payment for singles is $967.50 per fortnight, or $729.30 per fortnight each for couples. People who rent their homes may also be eligible for rent assistance up to $142.80 per fortnight in addition to this. Recipients will also receive a pensioner concession card, which provides concessions and discounts on pharmaceuticals and utilities, to name a few. So moving on to carer allowance. So this can be paid in addition to carer payment. It's an income supplement paid to carers who care for a child with a disability or medical condition, or an adult with a disability or medical condition. To qualify, you must provide additional daily care and attention to that person, provide care in your home or in the care receiver's home, and both meet residency requirements. Care allowance is also subject to a family income test of $250,000 per annum adjusted taxable income. There is no asset test for care allowance. Care and attention is care that is required daily for a minimum of 12 months, unless the care receiver is an adult with a life expectancy of 3 months or less. If you don't live with the person that you care for, you have to provide at least 20 hours of care every week. An additional form is required. That's called the Carer Allowance Questionnaire, which Services Australia will send out. Carer allowance can be paid for a maximum of 2 adult care receivers and any number of children under 16. Care allowance may be shared by 2 customers or 2 carers who are not members of the same couple. The 2 customers must care for the same adult or child care receiver and each meet the care allowance qualification criteria. Care allowance is $131.90 per fortnight for each care receiver. And we'll move on to disability support pension, which I'll refer to now as DSP. So it's an income support payment that can significantly improve the quality of life for a person who cannot work due to illness or disability, but unfortunately it can be very difficult to access. The qualification criteria is quite complex, and success often depends on submitting quality medical evidence in support of your claim. There can be many stages to applying for DSP. For example, Centrelink may require you to have a job capacity assessment or a medical disability assessment, or both, depending on the medical information supplied with your claim. So for the eligibility criteria, you must have 1 or more conditions that prevent you from working. The condition must be what they call fully treated and stabilised, which means that everything that can reasonably be done to improve your condition has been done. And stabilised means that your condition is not likely to improve over the next 2 years. The medical condition must meet manifest medical eligibility or cause you to have an impairment, which means that there are things you cannot do in your day-to-day life or at work. That score must be at least 20 or more from the impairment tables. You must be unable to work for more than 15 hours per week. So going back to a manifest grant, you may be eligible for this if any of the following apply. You are permanently blind, you need nursing home level care, you have a terminal illness and life expectancy is less than 2 years, you have an intellectual disability with an IQ of less than 70, you have Category 4 HIV, or you receive a Veterans Affairs special rate disability pension due to total and permanent incapacity. If approved for DSP, you may be required to participate in what they call a program of support, which aims to assist you with issues you have that makes it hard to work. This can include helping you look for work, gain work experience, training or study. This is usually referred to as mutual obligation requirements, and you may be expected to participate in these activities in order to receive payments. And just touching on, there's no slide for this one, but just wanted to give it an overview of NDIS as well, which is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. This is run by the National Disability Insurance Agency. The public-run scheme funds costs associated with a person's disability. It's available to anyone aged between 7 and 65. You must also meet residency requirements. It's available to people who need support from a person because of permanent and significant disability. And a significant disability means a disability with a large impact on a person's ability to complete everyday activities. The NDIS funds reasonable and necessary supports and services that relate to a person's disability to help them achieve their goals. The overall aim of the NDIS is to increase social and economic participation for people with disability. Once you are an NDIS participant with an approved plan, you can choose what supports and services you need to achieve your goals, who provides them, and where they are delivered. Support coordination may be included in a participant's plan if it is reasonable and necessary for the individual, but it's not generally funded in the participant's plan. Support coordinators help participants to implement supports in their plan, including government services, community activities, and funded supports. They'll work with a participant to assess and choose preferred providers, negotiate services to be provided and their prices, develop service agreements and create service bookings with the participants' preferred providers, and liaise with any plan manager provided to establish the appropriate claim categories and attribute the correct amount of funds. Once the types of services have been established, the participant might want to research providers on the internet, check reviews, get advice from friends or family, or speak with different providers before agreeing to work with them. Appointed coordinators or support coordinators can also help source NDIS registered providers, or one can search the provider finder on the MyPlace portal. Some handy questions to ask when choosing a provider include whether or not they're a registered NDIS provider, how they'll help you achieve your identified goals, how much their service costs, and how much of this is for administration charges. And I think the last area that I was just going to cover off was in regards to the essential medical equipment payment. So this helps with the additional costs of running essential medical equipment, medically required heating or cooling, or both. You may be eligible for this payment if you or the person in your regular care at home are covered by a Commonwealth concession card issued by Services Australia or the Department of Veterans Affairs. You provide proof that the heating or cooling or specified equipment is medically required, and you are responsible either wholly or partly for meeting the energy costs associated with running the equipment. So some of the equipment that's covered, there's a fair list of them, but it could encompass things like a home dialysis, home ventilator, respirators, heart pumps, electric wheelchairs, nebulizers, wheelchairs and insulin pumps, to name a few. And that it's an annual payment of $164 per piece of equipment. So on the next slide, we've got some information about how to claim financial support from Services Australia. So the easiest way to claim payments is online. You'll need a MyGov account linked to Centrelink or a Centrelink online account to claim. You can also make a claim by phoning the Disability, Sickness and Carers line on 132717, and you can also attend in person at your local customer service centre. Additionally, with DSP, you can claim by using a form, But unfortunately for carer allowance and carer payment, there are no longer forms available, claim forms to complete. So you will either have to do that online, in person, or as a staff assisted claim on that phone number, 132717. And now back to Mark to discuss a very important topic, getting your estate plans in order. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Yeah, that was very interesting, Rosie. Thank you for that. Estate planning is a very interesting area, and it's a very important area. It's important for anybody, irrespective of their circumstances, in my view. I think a lot of people think that estate planning is actually quite simple. You can just simply do an "I love you" style will, and away you go. And in many cases, assets just automatically transfer, don't they? If there's a joint ownership of a property, or you're nominating beneficiaries in a super fund, these sorts of things bypass a will. The way I look at it is wills are for families, and they really should include thinking about both partners in a relationship, and important matters like blended families and matters like that. So we'll just talk through a few things, but if you don't have a will, and a significant percentage of the population doesn't have a will, not having a will means that you are considered intestate, and that your estate, therefore, the assets that fall into the estate will be distributed according to a formula, which is slightly different from state to state. But in a nutshell, it could mean that assets aren't passed on according to your wishes, or in a timely manner, for your dependent beneficiaries who might be relying on access to those assets for their ongoing care. Also, not thinking about estate planning and not having a valid and appropriate will, could give rise to unnecessary claims against the estate in the future. So I think it's very important to address this matter for a whole bunch of reasons. And, the cost of completing wills is minor by comparison to paying lawyers later on to unwind and will deal with issues that you just didn't expect. Effective estate planning, I think the way I look at it, we have a saying that it's all about the right funds in the right hands at the right time. How much do you want to distribute, to who and to when? So, for example, if you want to set aside funds for a child, at what age would you want them to access the money? This is also very important for people who have blended families, because, there's often two sets of children that you might want to take care of. This has to be identified in a clearly documented and very strong will to make sure that your wishes are carried out. In terms of setting aside money for children for their future use at maybe 21 or 25, who should you be nominating as trustees? You will need people to manage the assets going forward for the benefit of the child. So it's a question of sort of thinking about what you want to have happen. In the first instance, it's generally about making sure that your partner has the majority of the assets to deal with debt and to replace income, etc., to meet ongoing expenses. But there's also, as I've said, many circumstances where you want to set aside funds for other purposes, and as I've said, such as for children. In setting up a will, in making sure you have an effective will, who is a reliable person you can appoint as an executor? This is probably the worst job in the world in many ways, being an executor of somebody's will. So you need someone who is very competent and reliable, trustworthy. Who are the individuals you should consider for guardianship if something happens for both parents? This is always the most difficult conversation that I've ever had with people talking about estate planning, because there are examples, of course, where there are times when both parents pass away at certain periods of time, and the children have to be cared for in some way. It's a question of not only funding for that, but who would you prefer to be guardians and caring for your children, making sure they're educated the way you want them to be educated, and cared for day to day in the way that you want them to be cared for, without putting financial hardship on those guardians. So I think that these are issues that you need to sort of think about. Having a will is very, very important, as I've said. It's not just for individuals, but it's, as I've said, it's for partners as well, because it carries right across generations and allows a simple and effective transfer of assets and wealth in many cases. Powers of attorney, many people just don't have powers of attorney, but I think it's critically important, particularly when you're undergoing medical treatment and ongoing care, to have access to both medical and financial powers of attorney. And I would include that I would include both parents in that discussion. So it's effective will planning, it's powers of attorney which tack on to help manage ongoing day-to-day care. Others to consider, and this has always been a little bit of a trap for some people, is to, where appropriate, to consider joint ownership of assets for ease of transfer. I've had plenty of examples of individuals who have had bank accounts in their own name, and they're suffering from cancer and dealing with cancer, and the outlook isn't terrific. And I've encouraged a number of people to go into banks and sort of make sure that bank account is put into joint names, so in the event of their passing, funds can go across easily to the surviving spouse. And a lot of people haven't done that. They feel intimidated when they go to a bank and they just don't get around to doing it. And so I've had examples in the past where people have gone into, a surviving spouse has gone in to access money after the passing of their partner, and not been able to access the money because it's not in their name, and they haven't dealt with powers of attorney, etc. So I think it's really important to sort of look beyond just wills and powers of attorney, but look at joint ownership of assets where appropriate. Nominating beneficiaries in super funds is really, really important. About 50% of people fail to do this. We've come across plenty of examples where people have nominated beneficiaries who, might have been a former partner or a former spouse. I've plenty of examples of people who have nominated their children as beneficiaries, which in many ways bypasses their partner and makes sure that it sort of ensures that the funds don't go into the right hands at the right time. So I think in terms of estate planning, it's not just the wills, and it doesn't have to be complicated, but you have to think about all of the issues and what's really important to you and your family, because it's about, at the end of the day, it's about the family. It's the other part of it is powers of attorney, just to make sure that the wheels of motion can keep going in the event of you being unable to deal with matters financial. But then the ownership of assets and nomination of beneficiaries, make sure that it's all done correctly so that there is no hold-ups going forward and that assets can transfer easily when required. Like anything, it's important to think about the outcome you need and to seek advice through a qualified lawyer. Not all lawyers are good at wills. I think it's important to, before you go and see a lawyer about estate planning, is to think about these issues. Think about the right funds, the right hands at the right time, so you can guide the conversation and you don't just get a will done to fill in an obligation that you feel. Clearly, accessing financial advice can also help point you in this right direction. There's many occasions where I have, and many other financial advisors actually guide the process with a lawyer, having understood the family circumstances. So I think the important part of this commentary, if you like, is that it's really important to document your wishes and what you want to have happen in the event of your passing. And the only way you can do that is through an effective will. So I think that's it for me in relation to estate planning. Liz, I think, is this back to you now, or where to now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Rosie, for that. I guess for everyone on the call today, this topic can be a little bit confronting at times, and you may have been witnessed a few things today and heard things that perhaps you haven't actually thought about yet. So we do hope that it's given you a little bit of food for thought and something to think of, particularly as you plan ahead as well, but hopefully also for some more immediate needs that you may need met in terms of accessing financial supports that are available through Centrelink. So support is available, and I guess that's the biggest message that we wanted to make sure that we could get across today, despite as challenging as this topic can be when you're in the midst of already dealing with perhaps a diagnosis or going through your treatment or navigating all the different needs of your family members. So PanCare itself has a financial assistance program. So if you are experiencing financial hardship, whether it's through accessing treatment or perhaps you live in a regional area and you're having to travel to perhaps a metro city like Melbourne or Sydney for treatment, we can actually help you offset some of those costs just to ensure that you feel supported at that time. So you can contact Pancare Foundation and speak with Sonia, who's our patient support manager, for a bit of a discussion on how we may be able to support you. Don't forget that Cancer Council also have pro bono financial advice that they can access you with, so ensuring that you feel supported in making decisions that are right for you and your family. As Mark has alluded to, seeking the advice of a qualified financial planner is really beneficial, and they'll ensure that the needs and circumstances of you and your family are considered, which is the most important part of trying to navigate through this journey. So you can actually find a qualified financial planner through the Financial Planning Association of Australia, and we've got that website up there, which is fpa.com.au. And obviously we've also had Mark and Rosie on the call today, who I'm also more than welcome to have a conversation with should you wish to discuss any of your circumstances as well. So we've got time for some question and answers. On this console there is a box that you can see that you may be able to, if you've got a question for Mark or Rosie, pop something into the chat. Whilst we can't give any specific advice directly to your circumstances today, we can certainly help point you in the right direction. And we've already had a few questions come in. So Mark and Rosie, I might direct either one of these to you. One of the questions that we've got is, perhaps this is best for you, Rosie, in relation to Services Australia, but can you explain the difference between what a pension is and allowances in the context of Centrelink?
Yeah, sure. So a pension is generally income and asset tested, but it's an income support payment. So it recognises that because of your illness or disability, or because of your caring role, you're unable to participate in substantial paid employment. Whereas an allowance is just an additional amount that you can receive in financial assistance. There's no requirement for you to have to give up your work or study or anything like that. So I guess in a basic sense, what the difference is between those.
That's great. And is that something that Centrelink is able to help navigate through if you were to go and actually speak to them and kind of put forward, your personal circumstance and what you're looking to access as well?
Yep, definitely. One of the things when in my former role at Services Australia, or Centrelink back then, was that we would just encourage people to test their eligibility for both care allowance and carer payment. And obviously we'd make that determination if they were, say, working over the 25-hour rule or something like that, then, obviously that part of it would be rejected. But it definitely can test your eligibility for any payments and supports.
Okay, thank you for that. This might be a question for either one of you, and it might be a bit of a challenge because it could be dependent on different circumstances. But if someone was to access their super in advance, are there any things that they'll lose, such as a healthcare card or other benefits because of accessing their superannuation? Is there either one of you best to answer that question?
That could be for you, Rosie. Yeah.
Yeah, look, it really depends on your other income and assets that you have. Generally speaking, though, there are income and asset thresholds for Centrelink. So early access to superannuation means that it's no longer, particularly if you're underage pension age, it basically means that it is now visible to Centrelink eyes. So it would be subject to the income and asset test, and it really depends on what level we're talking about there. With any assets, there is that asset test, but anything that you do pull out of super as well would also be deemed to be earning income at the deeming rates. But again, that's something that Centrelink will be more than happy to go through. There is a number that you can call to speak with a financial information service officer at a very high level. So, and you can ask these sort of questions, but their phone number is, 136357. So you can always make a phone call to a financial information service officer and ask about your specific amount as well.
Thanks, Rosie. Appreciate that. For a lot of people on the call as well, medication and access to medications, whether it's their standard therapy or other medications that are assisting them to live, is something that a lot of people are having to spend money on. How does one apply for the medication safety net? And is it a calendar or financial year basis? Is this one for you, perhaps again, Rosie?
I think so. All right. So basically for the safety net, if you're an individual with no dependents, you don't have to register at all. If you are a family or you do have a family, couples have dependents and things like that, you do need to register even if all of your dependents are listed on your Medicare card. So you just, again, register with Services Australia, and it is calculated per calendar year as well.
Okay, thank you for that. One of the other questions that have come through is regarding to accessing super and the DSP. I'll read the question out. How do you know when to access super or the DSP if your life expectancy has been defined as between 2 and 6 years? And I guess that's a challenge for a lot of patients who may be on the call, is that there is maybe a different life expectancy that has been given to them, but in relation to that one specifically.
Yeah, so I mean, it's always very difficult with those types of cases or that prognosis. I guess what I was talking about before with your manifest eligibility versus the normal disability support pension application process, it would be that with a prognosis between 2 and 5 or 2 and 6 years or beyond 2 years, you wouldn't qualify for manifest eligibility, which is pretty rough because I guess with a manifest claim, it's done a lot quicker. So that's the other thing. It's generally wrapped up between 1 and 2 months. When you have to go through the entire normal disability support pension process and have to meet certain ratings on the impairment tables, that's when you have to potentially go through a job capacity assessment and further medical evidence being furnished. You might need to have other tests along the way as well. So, yeah, it is a challenge. With carer allowance and carer payment, as we said as well before, if someone has a terminal illness, for carer allowance, it actually needs to be less than 6 months prognosis to have that granted without having to do what they call the THP or the ADAT score, which is the score that you will be assigned based on the medical report submitted as well as your carer questionnaire set within the claim form. So, yeah, it's definitely very challenging. But remember that any decision made by Services Australia is always appellable. And you can also go to, like in Victoria, we have Social Security Rights Victoria. They have a lot of information about submitting appeals against decisions made by Services Australia, or, just as you can reach out to someone like myself or the FIS officer or something like that, and we can definitely help you and talk through your options too.
Thanks, Rosie. Mark, it's probably a question for you here, and I guess that's in terms of, well, how do you know when is the right time to access superannuation? I guess that's probably very dependent on personal circumstances, but how would the process work with engaging a financial planner to kind of, I guess, look at that process in its entirety then?
Well, I think it all comes down to, as it always does, Liz, to where somebody is at this point in time, from a financial perspective or their own personal circumstances. And if there was no choice other than to access super, that's obviously the right time. I think that in the first instance, you could deal with accessing other assets, but to me, it's a client by client discussion. It may be best to leave other personal assets undisturbed and accessible if required, and you leave superannuation to one side. In some circumstances, it may be completely the other way around, and so. From my experience, it's been all based on what a client actually needs at that particular point in time. And, whether it be just to pay the bills or whether it be to help out a family member or to, make sure that things are done before it's too late for them to be part of it. So I can't give you a clear answer on that because it's very much based on circumstances.
For anyone who hasn't perhaps gone down the journey of going through financial planning before, is there any tips or tricks that you would advise for someone who feels maybe a bit apprehensive or it all feels too much trying to understand the different moving financial components? What advice would you give around trying to find the right fit for that family and how that process may work as well?
Yeah, look, accessing financial advice is obviously very intimidating. There are reputational issues, the industry doesn't necessarily have a great reputation right across the board. And there's always a feeling for a lot of people that financial advisors only talk to people with millions of dollars. I don't think that's correct at all. So I think it's, in the first instance, it's important to understand that advice is accessible and certainly through the FPA is one area of access, and apologies for letting you do that part of it, Liz. I was supposed to do that, I understand that. But I think in terms of preparing yourself, the important thing is you've got to be very clear on what your objectives are. Good advice can only be good advice if the objectives are clear. Otherwise it's just churning out a piece of advice that mightn't be relevant to your overall circumstances. So I think it's pretty important to go back to the initial conversation I had to try and understand what it is that's important to you and your family. What are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? And not to overburden yourself with too many objectives. It's okay to have concurrent objectives, short and long term. But I think it's important to be prepared so you can have that conversation. At the end of the day, it's your financial advice. It's your financial plan. So objectives are important.
No, thank you. Well, look, guys, we've only got about 4 minutes left in today's session, so we might leave the Q&A there. We do have Mark and Rosie's details on screen, so if there are any additional questions or perhaps you'd like to have a further discussion with them, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. So Mark and Rosie, thank you again for your time today. It's really valuable and a lot of great content to work through and lots of great questions to all be asking ourselves as we plan for our future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
That's okay. So before we wrap up, look, we do realise that today's session is probably posing a lot of challenging questions for you. So the most important thing that we said is that support is here and no matter what your circumstances are, you can find a way through it. So PanCare's PAN support team are here to help you. We've got 3 wonderful people who are in the PAN support team. Shannon, who is our upper gastrointestinal cancer nurse, Sonia, who is our patient support manager, and Mira, who is our internal support counsellor as well. And the 3 of these ladies are here to help you through any stage of your journey living with cancer, whether you've just been newly diagnosed or you're going through treatment. Perhaps if you do have some questions regarding, the financial support program that PanCare provide, or you're specifically looking at other ways that you can access financial supports in your state or territory, Sonia, our patient support manager, is the most wonderful person that you could be speaking to for a confidential conversation on what you may be able to access. All 3 of our staff are available for phone consultations or web phone calls as well, and you can book some time with them via the PanCare website as well. We've also, as a PAN support team, have other ways that we can support you as well. We've got fantastic patient and also carer support groups which are held on a monthly basis. So we encourage you, if you're looking to connect with others who are also living with cancer, to feel supported in a really safe and welcoming environment, we invite you to come to those support sessions which are available, further information on our website. We've also obviously will have today's webinar recorded and placed on our website, and that's also in regards to all the previous Living Well series webinars that we've hosted over the past couple of months, which include understanding and managing your symptoms, diet, nutrition, exercise, and also keeping an emotional well-being as well. So they're all available via the PanCare website. Really do hope that today's just provided you a little bit of insight into financial supports that are available, Don't feel overwhelmed by thinking of trying to do it all at once. Take your time to go through it. There is support available. Perhaps you'd like to start looking at the Financial Planners Association website to find a financial planner that's right for you, or visit the Services Australia website and see what other access to support you can get. If you've got any other questions, please contact us at the Pancare Foundation. You can email us at support@pancare.org.au. And don't forget that after today's webinar, there's a short survey that we'd love you to fill out as well, just so we can understand more about today's session and how that has met your needs, or anything else that you might like us to talk about in the future. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope that you found today valuable. Thanks to Mark and Rosie, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you all at some time soon. Thank you.